In the world of homicide investigations, there are smoking gun cases where a suspect is identified and incarcerated before the ink is dry on a police report. And then there are the classic whodunits. Any homicide investigator will tell you there is nothing worse than an open or unresolved death investigation, especially when they know there is a suspect on the loose and grieving family members seeking closure for the untimely demise of a loved one. The Orange County Sheriff's Office remains committed to finding the answers that will help bring the person or persons responsible to justice. Despite that commitment, there are some cases that remain difficult to solve. We present to you some of our most difficult cases in hopes that you might have information that will help solve these difficult cases.
That is from the Orange County Sheriff's Office Unresolved Homicides page. Their unresolved cases date back to 1941, and their online list includes 452 unsolved homicide and missing persons cases. They have another 18 more recent missing person cases on another page. 470 unsolved cases, quite frankly, is a number that defies almost any quantification or description. I mean, what do you say to a number so high that there's literally no way a single agency, never mind a small group of trained individuals that we call a cold case team, could in any way assimilate and understand the breadth and scope of all that data in those combined cases during the course of a career? It's just not possible. I will give them credit, the website is set up well, it is easily searchable, and there is sometimes a picture of the decedent or missing person along with a line or two of description. And I'm going to take them at their word that they've put together this webpage because they want information that might help them solve what they themselves call these difficult cases. The problem, as I almost instantly began to understand it, is that in many of these cases, when you go to look for information about these victims elsewhere, there's very little to work with, particularly in the older cases. Certainly not enough information that would realistically jog the memory of someone who might, all these years later, just stumble upon the page and have information. It's basically just a list of where bodies were found, where the incident may have occurred, and anyone interested in looking into those cases would need to dive headfirst into newspapers.com or ancestry.com, Spokeo, Facebook, and that is essentially what I did. Well, I first made a list and I went back to the 1970s and 80s, which I find is about how far back that you can go these days and still have the possibility of family members and witnesses associated with them to still be alive. I pulled up old newspaper articles and found that in every single one, there was barely anything at all. I mean, almost nothing. One article, maybe two, the week that a body was found, and then a follow-up the next day or within that week, and then nothing. Ever. That person was killed or went missing, and then, for all intents and purposes, their story ended. At least on paper. When I began getting record request denials, one after the other, until it became clear that neither the city police department or the sheriff's department in Orlando were going to release a single incident report, I was flummoxed. I don't generally have much trouble getting copies of reports from agencies in the surrounding counties. I've covered cases this old from all over Florida. Longtime listeners know my rule, in fact, about not covering cases unless I can get a significant amount of documentation, because I think it's the best way to tell a story, the story of the victim, and give you the facts at the same time, as opposed to speculation. Just spitting out what's already available online is not going to generate new information for law enforcement. In every one of these cases, very little exists to even remark upon the loss of their lives. No coverage on the news, no sustained coverage in the newspaper, no big push by the agency to get the word out. Just nothing. And then I went back through my records and contacted a couple people who I had interacted with over the years, whose cases are also held by these agencies. Cases that I had previously requested records from in previous years but was denied. In one case, I remembered it was a double homicide where I had interacted with a detective who said that it was being investigated at the time. He was very nice, in fact. So I backed off and I made my apologies to the daughter of one of the victims, even though I had already interviewed her and gotten some of the documents from her. She wanted her father's case to be covered. I contacted her again while I was preparing this season, and I asked her if anyone from the sheriff's office had contacted her since we spoke, and she said no. Despite the fact that she had reached out and tried, she got no calls back, and it had been years since she and I spoke. And it was troubling because that seemed to be a similar refrain from other family members that I began speaking with. They would call the Orange County Sheriff's Office or the Orlando Police Department, and nobody ever returned their call. And I hate being critical of agencies that I know are full of hardworking men and women who are really trying to get cases solved. But listen, that is unacceptable. There is no other way to describe it. And I also want to be clear, they don't owe me anything, these agencies. I know my way around getting a records request denial. I even get that with these agencies, it appears to be a across-the-board policy, because they don't have to release them, according to Florida statute. They can, they just don't have to. So they have made, clearly, the decision that they won't ever release documents on their open homicide and missing persons cases. And I get that it's easier. It's easier to do that than having to make a judgment call on a case-by-case basis. And that's because you need to know enough about that case to know what information you can release and what information you can't. But it is unacceptable for the family of an unsolved homicide or missing person to not get a call back or an update from law enforcement occasionally. I mean, my God, how about once a year? That's not too much to ask. Although, admittedly, when your stack is 470 cases deep, it would require a little bit of effort. And you know what? I have a suggestion. Have one of your records clerks put together an Excel spreadsheet with the victim's name, date of death, family members that are still alive, name and contact. Give them a call once a year. If nothing else, just to acknowledge that you know that they're still out there waiting for answers. Answers that may never come. Maybe make those calls on the anniversary of the death or the date that the person went missing, or the day before if you don't want to memorialize the day that they died. But do something to individualize it for that family that shows you're making an effort for them. For them, individually and their loved ones, so that they know that those loved ones have not been forever relegated to one of a list of 470 other names and pictures. And I want to acknowledge that these cases have got to be tough for the detectives. And just slogging through all the old documentation has got to feel insurmountable at times when you're looking at that deep stack of unsolved cases. And I will absolutely not take a single thing away from the people who are tasked to go through these very difficult old cases and actively try to pull a rabbit out of a hat in the form of a last-ditch effort of retesting evidence in the hopes of finding that one little nugget that might go along with any other circumstantial evidence that they already have. Something, anything that they can work with. And this is going to be tough to hear, but I also hope that these cases do weigh on the members of law enforcement when they lay their heads down at night, just like they do mine, because that is all we have as a community to ensure that there's something driving another individual to get answers for a grieving family. Because imagine how they feel. We have the privilege of setting a case aside and going on to the next when we're stuck or we can't find any other avenues to pursue. These families, they have nothing to set aside. They have nothing but unanswered questions. I understand that in most cases there is probably nothing new for law enforcement to tell them when they make that yearly call. But that's not an excuse. And if these contacts with families require difficult and uncomfortable conversations and real talk, then have those difficult conversations. Be honest with them when the likelihood is that they will probably never get the answers that they want. But at least acknowledge them and let them know you're trying. Don't dodge their calls. Whether you want to believe it or not, there is active harm in doing that. In this episode, I'm going to talk about two cases. from 1976 that are possibly related. I mean, they are really similar. It would be almost hard to believe that they were not related. This episode, we're going to talk about Mabel Andrews and Nancy Daniel. Let's start with Nancy because the details surrounding her case thus far are a bit more clear. She went missing in September of 1976. Her remains were found a few months later in March of 77, but unfortunately they were not identified as being her until decades later in 2014. It took multiple agencies, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, almost 40 years to pull the few details that they had together. Nancy's remains were found on March 12, 1977, along the shore of Lake Mann in Orlando, Florida, hidden in tall weeds in an overgrown lot at the end of Gore Avenue and east of Ivy Lane. What police knew then was that the body had been dead a few months, and they were not able to determine if any trauma had occurred or the cause of death. She was initially reported as a black female between 13 and 17 years old. There was some jewelry, an earring and a ring found near the body, as well as a pair of white pants. I don't know whether these items were ever shown to Nancy's family at the time, or to the other family of a missing young girl who had also been missing for some months by this time. There are some very obvious similarities, but back then the technology was not where it needed to be in 1977 for any kind of DNA match to take place. According to one detective who worked on the case, quote,
"There are missed opportunities that may have occurred, and some of that evidence may be lost forever."
Around November of 2011, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children started to look at the details of Nancy's case and the two sets of as yet unidentified remains found in and near Lake Mann. A few years later, a group of volunteer retired law enforcement agents met with the Orange County Sheriff's Office to review the cases. By that point, there was technology available to hopefully give them at least some of the answers that they needed. One of the problems that I see here is jurisdiction and an early lack of information sharing between agencies. Recently, I was told by a current Orlando police detective that, quote,
"The police department and the sheriff's office are two different record management systems, therefore they do not have access to our files and vice versa.
I was, however, assured that, quote,
We do not destroy case files for homicides or anything likely to be declared a homicide for at least 100 years as per statute."
In Nancy and Mabel's cases, some of the information appears to be held by the Orlando Police Department and some of the information held by the Orange County Sheriff's Office. According to the Orlando Police Department, Nancy Grace Daniel was last seen getting into a vehicle on Paramore Street in Orlando, only 5 miles away from Lake Mann, where the two sets of unidentified female remains were found. Her case, however, is maintained by the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Based on DNA evidence, Nancy was identified in May of 2014 to be the identity of one of the set of remains. That's where the investigation into her death could begin in earnest. It remains an open case today. But at the time her remains were found on the weedy shores of Lake Mann, there had already been another body found nearby just weeks earlier. That body remains unidentified to this day. Orlando Jane Doe, 1977. Those remains are thought by some to be Mabel Andrews. Now, if they're not, please understand that we have 3 black females who were unaccounted for that year in 1976, rather than 2. In the Orlando Sentinel, the day after the remains that would decades later be identified as Nancy's were found, there was an article with the headline, "Second Skeleton Found Near Lake Mann." And when they say near, they mean near, like a short walk around the block near.
The skeleton of a young woman was found in thick brush near Lake Mann Saturday morning, a quarter of a mile from where the skeleton of another young woman was found 7 weeks ago. Orange County Medical Examiner Thomas Hedgert said Saturday the death occurred a number of weeks ago, but the cause is still unknown. The skeleton, clothed only in undergarments, was found by 2 neighborhood boys playing near a canal on the west shore of Lake Mann near Gore and Aaron Streets. Deputy sheriffs said they did not find any more clothing, jewelry, or other personal effects near the site. Orange County work crews found the skeleton of a still unidentified young woman in 3 feet of water in Lake Man near Florence Street on January 21st. The medical examiner said she had been dead for more than 4 months. Deputies said at that time that it was impossible to link the deaths of the 2 women. At that time, they said the age and race of the victim found Saturday was still unknown.
The sheriff's captain said that they would be sending those remains to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. to help in identifying the victim. At that time, he said the identity of the first victim had not yet been established, but, quote,
investigators have several clues to the woman's identity.
Later, the FLUD, or Florida Unidentified Decedents Database, listed the following as being found associated with the remains that would later be identified as Nancy's: a gold-colored pierced earring, along with a gold-colored ring with the inscription Love in the set area. The ring had an adjustable band. A bra and knit-style bikini panties were present. The bra had a double blue heart design on the left cup and lace present on both cups. Brand name was Forever Yours with a size 34AA, style 888. The bikini-style panties were a fishnet material and white in color. Both Mabel and Nancy were missing for months by this time, so it would seem reasonable to assume that both families were shown both sets of clothing to try and identify. However, I have no indication whether or not that was done. It may be one of those missed opportunities that the detective from the Orange County Sheriff's Department spoke about. I do feel like 2 bodies found dumped near the same lake within a 7-week period would seem to indicate not only that the murders could be related, but based on where they were found, if they were related, I would guess that the perpetrator was someone local who knew the area pretty well, someone who was comfortable there. Before I get into when each of these girls was last seen, I want to note that the aforementioned jurisdictional dilemma would occur again with Mabel's case. While her case today is an Orlando Police Department case, the incident report of the still unidentified Orlando Jane Doe, 1977, that some people think could be Mabel, is with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Now, I'm not sure to what extent, if any, these jurisdictional issues could have affected these cases over the decades, but it is clear that the ability to positively identify them via DNA would not have been feasible in the early days of the investigations. That technology just did not exist yet. I have the 2-page incident report dated January 21st, 1977, for the still unidentified Jane Doe. The weather that day, the day that she was found, is described as cold, and police were dispatched to the corner of Florence Drive and Lenox Boulevard, near Lake Man. The evidence found at the scene was taken from the west side of a dock on Lake Man. Clothing found near the body were a pair of blue jean-like pants, size 5'6", a yellow and brown earth-toned blouse with the 3rd button missing, and on it had a beach scene, flowers and pictures of people printed on the front, size 32, pastel-colored underwear with a floral pattern, a bra, and a left blue flip-flop. The notes indicated that the clothing gave no evidence of foul play, and that is important, and that I take it to mean there were no cut marks or holes or general damage in the clothing that indicated that she had been shot or stabbed while wearing them. The report also indicated a silver bracelet with a blue stone was found in the water near the body. Now, there are images available online of these items if you search Orlando Jane Doe 1977, or if you search Mabel Andrews, as many people believe they are one and the same person. The Jane Doe 1977 incident report notes that a laborer working for the Orange County Road Department had found the body, and when police arrived, he led them into a large weeded area near a small wooden dock. The county worker told police that he and a friend were looking for a place to fish after work, and they walked down onto the dock, and that's when they saw the bones. And one of them ran back to the truck to get a flat-edged shovel to scoop the bones up out of the water to see what type of bones they were. So when they arrived, police found what looked like human bones laying out on the deck. Police would find similar bones in about 2 feet of water nearby, along with smaller bones. Later that day, a diver would go into the water and recover more bones. The medical examiner's office would also be on scene and give their opinion that it appeared to be a small-built female in her 20s. Now, as far as when they were last seen. The last time 14-year-old Nancy Grace Daniel was last seen was outside the Wooden Nickel Game Room near Paramore in Orlando on September 6, 1976. She had been at the game room with her cousin Eugenia, and Eugenia said that Nancy had left the game room first, and when she walked out, Nancy was talking to someone inside a vehicle that she described as red with a black top. Nancy then got into the car. It was around 12:30 a.m., and that's the last anyone saw of her. Nancy was reported missing to the Orlando Police Department the next morning. It's relevant to remind you that while that report went to the city police, Nancy's case today is with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. That report is noted to have described Nancy as 5'3", about 100 pounds, wearing white pants, a green floral top, and tennis shoes. There was a preliminary investigation done. Witnesses were questioned at the time. They did some searching, but the body would not be found for months and wouldn't be identified for decades. After the identification, there was a press conference and a splashy article in the Orlando Sentinel to announce the progress of the case, and that was in 2014. But since then, there's been nothing public-facing. Whatever progress may have been made in the ensuing 10 years remains unclear. With 16-year-old Mabel's case, the story is a bit murkier. On all the public pages dedicated to her case, it's noted that she was last seen off of America Court in Orlando on January 16, 1976, and that she often walked from the Bruton, Columbia area down to Paramore, where her grandmother lived. And as you recall, Paramore was the area where that game room was, where Nancy was last seen. But in November of 2013, Mabel's brother Tommy Andrews petitioned the court to declare his sister deceased, pursuant to Florida statutes. In his petition, he said his sister had been missing since December 24th of 1974. He advised the court that his sister left their home in Orlando to go to a neighborhood park, but that she never returned. And then, in 2019, someone filed a records request with the Orlando Police Department, and at that time, they released 5 pages on Mabel's case. Those were posted on the Muckrock website. At the top of the first of these 5 pages, I noticed that the case number begins with 2014, which indicates that this report's inception was in 2014, and not back in 1976 when Mabel went missing. What initiated this document was contact by Judy Andrews, the wife of Mabel's brother Tommy Andrews, right around the time that he had petitioned the court to find his sister deceased. Tommy's wife had indicated that she had married into the family, and she wanted to know the status of the case. At that time, a detective from the Orlando Police Department ran Mabel on teletype, and there was no record found for a missing person case with her name or date of birth. So the detective asked the records department to search for any responsive documents, but none were found for Mabel. I feel for that detective because I have now gotten the exact same response from them on multiple occasions. Learning that case files that old are not all merged into the most recent system, and that the police and sheriff's department have 2 separate record management systems with no computer access to one another's files, kind of explains how we can get where we are today. Criminals don't respect legal boundaries. It would seem to me, best case scenario, the Orlando Police Department and Orange County Sheriff's Department would share a computer system so that those patterns that emerge in cases like these would be much more quickly and easily noted. So in 2014, that detective set out to find some of Mabel's family, and she located Mabel's non-identical twin. This non-identical twin said that Mabel was a habitual runaway and that she frequented a place called the Green Parrot. It was also learned at that time that Mabel's parents were both deceased, and this report says that the last known sighting of Mabel was on January 16, 1976, when she was recovered by the Orlando Police Department after being missing since Christmas Eve of 1975. It's still unclear where she was last seen and when she was last seen. So the non-identical twin sisters' DNA was obtained, and Mabel was entered into NamUs. Over the next couple of years, DNA samples were collected and eventually entered into CODIS. The ME's office provided law enforcement with a blood sample in 2016 of a possible familial match in the younger brother of Mabel Andrews. It was sent to be compared with the unidentified remains in the Orlando Jane Doe 1977 case. And that report says, quote, which is believed to be Mabel Andrews. So all signs pointed to yes. And yet, that's where the reports ended, and web sleuths from all over the country began writing to the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office, trying to get answers about the DNA comparison so they could do rule-outs on their own unidentified cases. Via one sleuther's back and forth with a sheriff's office in San Bernardino County that was posted directly to web sleuths, we learned the following in an email response from the Forensic Services Supervisor with the District 9 ME's office in Orlando.
Good afternoon. I have responded to a number of people who have inquired on these two cases over the past few years. We are not trying to be difficult in our response, but currently our hands, as well as that of law enforcement, are tied. While I cannot disclose all of the details and circumstances of the comparison/investigation, at this time the DNA comparison between the family of Mabel Andrews and our unidentified case 77-0043 was not a match. The circumstantial information is very compelling, which is why we haven't completely ruled them out. But, based on the DNA results, we cannot currently link them together.
So, what we know to this point is that the unidentified remains of the Orlando Jane Doe found in Lake Man in 1977 do not match the samples taken from family members from which they were collected. To this day, the Jane Doe remains unidentified. But speaking of family members, this is probably a good time to take a quick side quest, as it were, and look at Mabel Andrews' brother, Tommy Andrews, the one that wanted to have her declared deceased in 2013. He made that plea from prison, where he lived for most of his adult life. In 1987, Tommy Andrews became the first American to be convicted in a DNA case and was sentenced to a total of 100 years behind bars. He's out now, by the way. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about Tommy Andrews.
Andrews came into my children's window, jumped on me with a sharp object at my throat and threatened to kill me. Trying to talk to him in between fights, in between being choked, in between being smothered. This meant to me he was here to kill me. I had no doubt he was going to be guilty.
The court commits the defendant to the Department of Corrections.
Using DNA to help identify the source of a biological sample in a forensic case was unprecedented, so I was certainly aware that this was groundbreaking.
Andrews became the first person in the U.S. convicted with DNA. Though when I talked with him behind bars in 2008, he denied it.
That's you.
Yeah.
They say. You're saying this is not you?
No, it was when they brought this to me, and I'm like, hey man, that looked like a bunch of dots.
Stay tuned.